Welcome to the Sonic Days podcast, home of all things audio. This season was recorded live at Sonic Days 2024. In this episode, we explore the future of immersive audio with a panel of leading voices from across the industry. From automotive design to mastering, from consumer electronics to content creation.
All right, we're going to get started. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcela Rada. I am an audio engineer and doctoral researcher focusing on workflows for immersive music production at the University of Surrey in England. Very happy to be here as a part of this panel. And, we're all here very passionate about immersive audio, and this is what this panel is about. So why immersive audio? That might be something you were wondering if you're not into it yet, or if you're kind of debating whether you should be or not. But today we got a group of experts. We cover quite a few different areas in immersive audio. And as I come from the academic world, I've been researching lots of different areas. So I think it's great that we are able to cover music production, vehicles, headphones, devices, software, all that. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Different applications of immersive audio and why we want to tell you about them, why perhaps you should care, and how it's applied now. I want to start with if everybody could just introduce yourself and briefly tell us what application of immersive audio you work on.
Hi everyone, my name is Oliver, or Ollie Scheuregger. I'm originally from the UK, and I studied the Tonmeister sound and music, or music and sound recording degree. That's sort of where I got into audio, and through that I did an internship at Fraunhofer in Germany at the audio department there, and I pretty much worked there about 10 years, focusing primarily on binaural processing, so rendering virtual acoustics over headphones. And I did a lot of stuff in that, both from sort of research, developing algorithms, testing, a bit of software development, and a lot of perceptual evaluation as well. But we also worked quite a lot on sort of content creation tools, because there was, in combination with MPEG-H, if you're aware of this codec, it's a bit like Dolby Atmos, and there was a growing need to sort of train and educate people around this world of, let's say, immersive channel-based audio, but also object-based audio. And then the last 3 years, I've been at Bang & Olufsen. I was an engineer working in spatial audio. I put quotations around that on purpose because it's a very interpretable word. But again, developing technologies for both loudspeakers and headphones. And now I run the advanced technology team. So we're primarily identify and develop emerging technologies which will eventually serve our products in the future.
I don't know where to start. I'm used to being on the other side of the microphone. My name is Michael Romanowski. I'm a mastering engineer, studio owner. I've been doing immersive for a very long time in lots of different ways. I'm from California and on the wrong time zone at the moment, so bear with me if I either stutter or ramble. Yeah, either direction. I've been doing this for a while. I love it. I'm on the creation side of working with the artists and making records. I've been fortunate enough to work with some amazing folks. I've been fortunate enough to win a handful of Grammys and stuff like that, doing the knob twisting side of it, but also in part of that, working with a lot of the developers. So I built my first surround room in 2001. Somewhere around 2015, 16, I put the height speakers in. And I started doing that, and I was working with Dolby and the codecs and Fraunhofer and codecs and RO3D and Sony 360. And I've been a proponent of trying to better the one perception, but the other is the content. There's some best practices, and there are whole lots of things about people trying to get in and do stuff. So the distribution side of things, how do the consumers hear the work that we do? I wish everybody could hear the work sitting in my room, full range speakers, full out a 916, or I've actually have the Sony set up speaker-wise in there as well, and I can rack rail. I can move the height speakers, for example, to accommodate other formats also. So beyond trying to be the person with the connection to the artist and best practices for actually distribution, I also work with companies and other folks on the academic side and the development side to try to create the tools. I've been a pioneer and I think one of the first mastering engineers specific for immersive audio for music releases. Even a tech nomination for studio design for that a bunch of years ago. So I've been doing this for a while and I love it, and I'm honored to be here to be the sort of a creative liaison for all y'all.
Thank you.
I was going to say, yeah, and Spatial. I love the Spatial thing, and I forgot my mug. Sorry, and I'm also like under-caffeinated, but I carry a mug with. I did manage to get a trademark a little bit ago that says "Mama says I'm spatial." It works in a southern U.S. accent, but it's
Nice. Yeah.
Sorry, I took that away.
No problem. I'm Jonatan Ewald from Volvo Cars here, and I work with the reproduction side, trying to bring what Michael and others is doing to the public. I have an background in audio engineering and electronics engineering. Been making electronics for various companies, and I started at Volvo around 2009, mainly working with hands-free processing, noise reduction algorithms, and these kind of things. But since 2011, I work with the audio attribute, which basically is the end customer experience for all playback of sound in Volvo vehicles, and also Polestar vehicles, our sister brand. So that is what I do, and we brought a car here, and I hope some of you, or all of you, or many of you have had a chance to listen, and if you haven't, it's here tomorrow as well, so grab a chance of that. And yeah, that's basically me.
Cool. I'm David Ziegler. I work for Dolby. So as a company, Dolby, we are, of course, a little bit in between the things that Michael is doing and then bringing that to the end devices, like the cars, like the headphones, home theater systems. So that's what we as a company try to be, being that bridge. And within the company Dolby, I'm working much closer to what you're doing. So I'm one of those Dolby guys you were referencing to, so that came to your studio and worked with you. So I do this, of course, on the European side. So I wasn't lucky enough to see your studio yet. Yet, exactly. We're working on that. So I'm based in Berlin, looking after mixing engineers, sound studios all over Europe. So my main regions are German-speaking territory, the Netherlands, and sometimes the Nordics as well. So I set up some studios up here, worked with some music engineers, and so yeah, obviously telling people where to put the speakers, explaining our tools, explaining also like basic mixing techniques. In the end, of course, everybody figures out their workflows and they do much better than we can ever imagine. But of course, we start in the beginning by showing the first steps, pushing people in the right direction. We've been doing that for quite a while, and currently our main focus is actually more on the artists and labels side, because we feel actually in the music industry a lot of the mixing engineers really enjoy this, and still there are, of course, not everybody is as an early adopter as you were, but we see more and more people that get into it. But it's super important to also explain it to the labels that sometimes just see it as a cost center, and to explain it to the artists that sometimes don't have time to go to a studio and listen, and to try to bring all of those ends together so that we have a lot of nice, good sounding Atmos content out there. In terms of background, actually, I'm also tone master. I also studied audio engineer, was mixing mostly in the movies industry, come from a post-production background, came to Dolby 2012. It's quite a while already, and back then I was also mostly working with Dolby Atmos on the movies, sound post-production side. And then when music became a thing in Dolby Atmos, I also went into the music area more, and though since like 3 or 4 years I'm working pretty much for Dolby Atmos music.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, well, I think we can get started with the questions now that we know the kind of expertise that we have in the room. And I want to start with the basics. we hear a lot of things about immersive audio, different terminology, spatial audio, 3D audio. Are they all different? Are they the same? So please define immersive audio and tell us if you think spatial audio is something different or if you would use the terms interchangeably. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay.
Next one is
I'm just bold and start here because I still have the mic. So, to me personally, first off, immersive audio and spatial audio are to me just different words to describe the same thing. For an average consumer, the average person out there that does not make a living in sound, I think it's hard enough to explain the whole thing that there is something beyond stereo. And whether you call it spatial or immersive audio, actually in Germany we call it 3D audio, 3D audio, because we like numbers so much or whatever. So you have to find some terminology that resonates. At the moment it seems that spatial seems to win the race and more people can recognize the term spatial than immersive. I personally kind of prefer the term immersive because of that sound, that concept of being immersed in audio, having it like all around you, being like in the middle of the sound. That's for me what really makes immersive audio. So I can really connect with that terminology, but I'm fine using either of those. And to me, it's kind of interchangeable. And if you want to ask the second question, what is immersive audio / spatial audio for me? Yeah, that's kind of what I already said. It's everything beyond stereo. It's a sound format that gives you that feeling of being in the middle of the audio somehow, of having that possibility that the sound can be around you, or maybe using overheads in some kind of way, using all directions. But the main thing is to give the audience that feeling of being in the middle of the soundscape.
Yeah, I can go also. I mean, yeah, I would agree to a large extent, but I would like to add in automotive space, I think one thing that is very big in automotive that hasn't maybe been so big in other areas, that is upmixing. And basically, I would say you basically had upmixing from when you had your first head unit with 4-channel stereo, because you basically duplicated the 2 stereo tracks to the rear seat, and I mean that is a form of upmixing. And then after that, of course, you have had much more advanced upmixers where you can throw things around and so on. But the source is still stereo, and I would call that experience immersive. Would I call it 3D audio? Maybe not. I don't know. But I mean, it's definitely a spatial experience. So I do think there's a difference between like the delivery format and the end user experience, and if the end user cares or not. I don't know if is it so important that we define it, because I mean you can have a really good stereo experience, and you can have a poor stereo experience, and you can have a really nice and immersive experience with stereo content, and you can have an amazing immersive experience with Atmos content or other content. So I choose not to fully define it.
That's great. Interesting perspectives. I think that as I see it, spatial seems to be something that is just sort of meant to this. I think of, mono, stereo, and then surround gets to the plane, and then going into something like spatial or 3D audio starts to add the ceiling speakers. So for example, immersive is such a word that gets thrown out. Soapbox for a minute, it's kind of like mastering. Everybody goes, oh, now we've got, it becomes a buzzword. Mastering grade converters, mastering grade headphones, mastering grade coffee, like whatever it happens to be, we use those words as things. So immersive seems to be coming along as that word that is just used for stuff. The term immersive seems to be something that you're just engaged with and around. I think of the car as an immersive, even in stereo or as quad or however it goes, is an immersive experience because you're in a confined environment that you're sort of immersed in the sound. So I'm kind of leaning more toward thinking that spatial is becoming a little bit more uniquely descriptive of a 3-dimensional sound without being format specific.
I guess perhaps a little controversial. I don't really think immersive audio exists in the sense that it's not a thing.
Why are we here?
Well, it's not,
Not it.
a mono mix played over a very good mono loudspeaker could be incredibly immersive. Correct. If you, as a user, have an immersive experience. Likewise, a fully blown 714 mix plays over a 714 system and you're not engaged, you're not immersed, is not an immersive experience. There is potential, but it doesn't define it as immersive, in my opinion. We were having this chat yesterday at B&O with some colleagues, and we sort of break up very, very crudely, the audio chain from, production, delivery, and reproduction. And within production, you can maybe break it up also into like capturing, so recording microphone signals or generating audio signals through synthesizers and so on. And then representation, so you then basically mix that into some sort of format, whether it's stereo, whether it's Dolby Atmos and so on. But ultimately, throughout that whole chain, at no point is the content immersive, in my opinion. It only becomes immersive once it's been reproduced and experienced by an end user. Then it can become immersive. So that's kind of where I would stand. So I have a little bit of issue calling audio immersive. I think spatial is an interesting one because that does have a bit more, perhaps, physical, like roots in physicality, in the sense that by definition, spatial audio means that sound is coming from a certain point in space. So there are limitations if it's a mono mix played over a mono loudspeaker. Yes, I agree. I think it was Michael that it may not be so spatial. It would be tough to argue that's a very spatial mix, whereas a 714 has a lot more potential. But I'll leave it there as far as I stand.
Can I say something else? I love your train of thought there. So thinking about, immersive is sort of the experience of the music, no matter what it is. Spatial it dictates a dimensionality in reproduction. Like in a sense, so what you're saying, and I think, and what I'm agreeing with you on is that like this could be immersive because you could hear it, even as a mono thing, it'd be great. But the spatial is more of a three-dimensional aspect of it. So one is an experience, and the other is an intent.
Yes, and I don't think you can pin it on either the content or the technology. It's a combination of both. So, for example, a 714 mix played over a 714 loudspeaker array, in which you have one mono stem played in every single speaker equally, is not spatial. You don't have a sense of where things are, unless not spatial. Would you call that immersive? No, I wouldn't even call it. I might call it immersive. Someone else might not. If I'm immersed in that mono mix.
Right. If it's mono coming out of all the channels, yeah, I get that.
But that's where immersive becomes very difficult. In the academic literature, it's not. There is no consensus in the sense that some people believe it's more psychological. So if you are immersed in the activity of what you're doing, if you're lost, right, if you're out of your own body, and that could happen through listening to a single loudspeaker or even in silence. Right. And some people think it's more physiological, that you're literally your senses are immersed from all directions or from. Yes, cool. You get the idea.
Thanks. I get it.
Yep, that's what I was going to say. In academic literature, the word immersive is normally used to describe perception, and perception is subjective, while spatial audio tends to be used as the technology that allows you to localize sound in a 360 sound field, technically. Although those are not specific definitions, but that's what I've found, that normally those are the terms to describe those two.
Do you think we need to fix that? I mean, so for the rest of the world, like we should get together as academics and practitioners and
just tell everybody, let's just do
this. Verbiage to use it all, less confusing.
Kind of the way it currently is, it kind of makes sense because Apple has their spatial audio, Netflix spatial, a lot of like the technology providers use the term spatial, while when you talk about experiences, very often the word immersive kind of wins. But I think in the end, I was kind of referring to the end user, like a person, if you are exposed to spatial sound, the experience is supposed to be immersive. If you are exposed to an immersive experience, very often the technology used about that is spatial. So I think for the end user, it's kind of interchangeable. Ultimately, I think it's hard enough to explain to them that there's something beyond stereo, so that I don't think we have to be too critical about these two terms being interchangeable. But I think if you're really getting academic, then this definition you all three had, I think makes a lot of sense.
But I think also what you were into with the headphones and so on, the end consumer in a way, you want to know what you're getting, right? What is my transport? Yeah, what is my expectation? What is the transport format? what is the rendering format and so on. And I think that is also like a problem like now with all the different distribution services and so on. There's so many ways along the chain, like, I listened to this mix and it was great. Oh, but it wasn't Atmos version, it was some other version, or it was this and that. And then you played it, I played it back on this system. Yeah, but that system weren't enabled, so you actually heard the stereo mix. And so I mean, from a consumer space, I think it's more important to just know what am I listening to. And then all of this sort of marketing hyperbole is a bit dangerous, I would say, if you call everything immersive. I don't think the end consumer might know the difference. Oh, is this all 3D? Is it Atmos? Is it immersive? Is it spatial? So I think in a way it would be good to agree a little bit about when we're talking about spatial audio, like what is the key prerequisites that you need to nail in order to at least have some credibility marketing wise and so on.
Mm.
Yeah, that brings me.
Like having a list like a thing. Like if you're going to call it this, it's got to satisfy these requirements.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's
But that's pretty good. It's like, the robot thing, Asimov. You had 3 things. You got to figure, like, if you're going to call it immersive, it can't be marketing. It needs to do this. It has to be.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that brings me to my next question, which is about, there seems to be confusion on the consumer side still as the technology evolves, that it's normal. What are some things that the company that you are a part of or yourself that you're doing to deal with consumer confusion?
So it's a real challenge because there's a sort of plethora of devices on the market that all claim to do spatial or immersive audio. In the headphones world, you've got Apple and Apple call it spatial audio, Bose actually call it immersive, just as an interesting example. But they're the same technology underneath, right? It's binaural rendering. That's all it is. But have headphones which do something very similar now, and there are many out there. But then you have standalone devices, speakers that do some kind of mid-side processing to make it sound a bit more diffuse. And we have soundbars, which have Dolby Atmos decoders, so you can then get a 714 output from that and do something with it to imitate or at least play back all the signals that the user is getting. And then you have discrete systems as well, where you can start building up the actual, let's say, the real sort of ground truth system. But that's also a huge challenge because just the sheer number of speakers that you need to install, the placement of them, and there are the sort of limitations on consumers' patience and wallets when it comes to if you want to have a wired system. Okay, you need to have an installer come and wire every single speaker up and place it in the ceiling correctly and so on. So I think the really interesting part from the consumer side is what does the future look like for the playback of multi-channel audio? And when I say multi-channel, I mean everything from Dolby Atmos to MPEG-H and Sony 360RA. I don't know. I really don't know how it will look. I know that there's a huge variance in types of experiences that you can get depending on the playback device that you have. And some of those experiences will be liked or enjoyed by consumers just due to preference. One really good example is the Sennheiser Ambio soundbar. It has a button, you press it, and my God, it is immersive. Like it fills the room, and you feel like the sound is much, much larger than the soundbar. And you turn it off, and it kind of zoop, it becomes much narrower. And people may really, really like that, and that's totally fair. Now, is it good, fair representation of the original Dolby Atmos mix? Probably not. But is it preserving some important attributes of the input mix? So if you're listening to the original mix in the studio, perhaps Michael was mixing it, and there are certain attributes that we talk about, like localization, how well can you point to sounds in space, how enveloped do you feel, is there a good sense of stage height, all that stuff. So there's all like attributes, there's your ingredients to your recipe. And as a consumer, someone who makes consumer products, the question is, how many of those can we preserve? If we build the real system and you sit in the right place, we've done our job as best as possible. We will preserve every single one of those attributes. The rest is up to the listener to kind of perceive it. But as soon as we start changing that, the question is, well, okay, what do we compromise on those attributes? Do we want to keep that sort of sense of immersion, that envelopment? Do we maybe want to enhance it, make it sort of ultra real, or exaggerate it, let's say? But knowing that we'll always sacrifice on other things like localization, for example, by definition. I don't know if they answered the question. I think my point is there is many different ways to experience these types of content, and
what's Bang & Olufsen doing to, make it as easy as possible for the consumer?
By providing access to the content. That's number one. If the content is out there and people want to listen to it, we must provide access to it. So that means in this case having a Dolby Atmos decoder on our soundbar, for example. You've got it, and then the question is, what do you do with it once those signals are on your soundbar? And then we have to start providing all these kind of tiers of experiences. So if you only buy a soundbar and you're playing Dolby Atmos, you should be able to listen to that Dolby Atmos mix. But if you then buy, two BLAB 50s or two BLAB 90s, and you start building up a surround system, then maybe you don't want to only use the soundbar, you also want to use those discrete speakers, so then you have different presets. So that's something that B&O provide out of the box. You can build up your system over time, and you could, go towards the real system, the ground truth, or the reference system, let's say. Music is a very interesting one, though, because when we're talking soundbars, typically it's movie content. So what happens with music in the future? That's something we are working on, and we are looking at. Personally, have been working on it for the last couple of years. We don't really have an answer because it's a very different ball game. Because when it's music, how people sit and listen to music these days is so radically different to watching a movie. You can't guarantee a speaker in the middle. You can't guarantee a stationary listener either. They're going to be up around, walking around the living room doing different things. And then the inter-channel differences start to become very dynamic, and you lose all control over stereo panning, or how can you control the sense of immersion as people move around. So I don't have an answer. We are working on that side of things, but it's tricky. And then headphones is a whole other can of worms, which I can discuss for 3 hours, but I'll stop there. But that's what I've worked on.
As a liaison between the artist and the technology, I spend a tremendous amount of time, for one, investigating. So I've got the Ambio soundbar in my living room, and yeah, it's not surround. It does do its thing. I still think it's sonically one of the gold standards as far as drivers and amplifiers and stuff, but it's only a 514. If I do a 714 project, I want to play it back into that. I'm listening to some compromised version, but so is everybody in some sense. I have to do two things. I have to educate my clients as to what this is and why it is and why they're doing what they're doing. But I also have to investigate and hear what it is. As a mastering engineer, on top of all of that, my job is to make sure everything is as translatable as possible. What we're looking at is if you play it in headphones in car and sound bars and full out discrete systems and, rooms like this and stuff like that, the experience from the artistic communication side needs to be transmitted as best as possible, no matter what the format is or the speaker playback. So my job is to be that in between, is to know everything I can about how things are going to translate, and then teach it to my clients to be able to say, well, if you're going to be listening, this is how you should be doing it. If you're going to be checking your mixes and you can't do it in a room, you can't come to my place. If you're listening to headphones, if you're listening to this, if this is the binaural codec for this is the spatial codec for that. Like these are all over the place. And so, there's also the dialogue, the communication. What are you hoping to get out of it? Who are you communicating to? And so there's a lot of in between. I'd say there's a fair amount of artists that I've worked with that I've brought over to my studio. There's a couple of just recent I can think of. I'll say it. There's two of them. There's one, an artist in the Bay Area named Fantastic Negrito, really great artist, and I think his music is amazing. And I went to him and I said, dude, I think your stuff is super cool. I want to do a record with you. I want to do an Atmos version of it. And he goes, that's amazing. What is that? And so I said, all right, tell you what, come on over to the studio. And we spent about 2 hours playing stuff. And I just played a whole bunch of stuff and then said, here's 10th row orchestra, here's shiny objects, here's all of this, here's what this codecs are, here's what headphones, like sound bars and stuff. And, he got into it and he's like, all right, great. And sideways to that, the other part of the conversation was, great, what do you want me to do with this as a mix? He's like, well, I already have the stereo record, so, do whatever you want with it. That's one of the things about the content is thinking about, is that so much of the stuff that's coming out now is secondary reactions to content we already know. There's a difference between starting from scratch now, preconceiving a record, miking it, producing it, writing it, arranging it, thinking it's going to come out in the future as immersive audio, 3D spatial audio, whatever we're going to say that is, or taking some known quantity that was made for stereo, that was stemmed out to stereo, that was never made for immersive spatial audio, and it's kind of adapted to. So there's a familiarity aspect we're trying to get musicians and consumers over, because they're used to hearing something in a particular way. And if you go too far with it, they go like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like I'm used to. I'm going to go back to the stereo. The headphone thing is a huge thing, because we are so used to listening to music in headphones that we have the center image in the middle of our head and a couple of bullhorns shouting at us. But when you take the center image and you pull it out here, it's disarming for people who aren't used to hearing those codecs. So it may be technically awesome and spot on as a reproduction and still curious to them, or disarming in a weird way that they don't know how to handle it. There was something else you said. Oh, yeah. The other side of that is educating folks what the difference is between cinema playback and music playback. Going into a cinema room, trying to listen to music that was made for music creation, spatial, is different than listening to it in a theater. You guys all know, right? So the rake theater, the rear's heights aren't this, you don't really need either. The rears are above you, if you're sitting down here, and the heights, aren't really existent. But the other side is that the side walls, we're listening to, these are even high in here, but when you're listening to music, it's at your ear level. When you're listening to music in a theater, it's way up top. And so would your decisions, the creative decisions, be different, much less the distribution and the playback. And so then the experience is going to be weird to the consumer. So the long story, or the short answer is, you got to educate your clients as well as the consumers, because nobody's going to educate the consumers better than the artist in that sense. Because, we can market all day long, but the artists go, my record is the shit, and you need to listen to it like this. They're going to go, oh, I got to go figure this out because they said that, and I'm a fan of them. So we have a responsibility to get the artists to also be the messengers.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a lot.
What's Volvo doing?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, we build vehicles, but I truly believe that the automotive space could be also for stereo. It can be, I wouldn't say like the last output or like a haven or so on, but for many people it is your me time. You might have a busy life with different things, not have that much time to just down in your favorite chair, listen to a really good set of stereo speakers, or your amazing 7.1.4 that everyone has at home, of course. But in a vehicle, you really can. So when you take that commute time, hopefully you have a fairly silent vehicle and electric, of course. And yeah, it's exactly, it's quieter, and you have your amazing audio system. And I would also sort of like to push for hearing spatial audio over loudspeakers, or hearing any audio over loudspeakers. To be honest, I think there's a lot of focus on binaural, and that's great, and it's it's really needed. It's the sort of gateway drug or access port for many people to experience spatial at all, and there are a lot of great codecs and products out there, but it is a different thing to hearing a loudspeaker system. So I guess that's what we're trying to deliver. We're trying to deliver vehicles to customers that are hopefully as close to the artist intent as possible.
For Dolby as a company, it's one of our biggest tasks, obviously, because we make our living on this whole immersive / spatial audio thing, and as you say, it's a bit confusing. It's a lot of new concepts, a lot of new terms where even we were not completely 100% sure how they are defined. That super often asked question, how can I hear it? That whole topic about artist intent, does it sound close enough in the Volvo to what Michael heard when Fantastic Negrito approved the mix in your studio, said, yeah, that's great, this is how my fans should hear it. Yeah. Then they go into your car. is that close enough? That was exactly also what you there said about the whole getting from the premium level, the big home cinema, down to start adding a sound bar all the way down to headphones. So that whole journey is where Dolby is in, and on all of those points in that journey, we try to solve confusion, to make it easier, to make it clearer. Some of my colleagues engage directly with manufacturers, which you both have seen, that we kind of approve these devices, try to get that artistic intent through as good as possible. Another super important part of what we do is the visibility. At what point is a device showing the Dolby logo or not showing it? When is that lighting up on the car display, on the soundbar? At what point can you have the logo on the packaging? How are we communicating it? Again, we are actually not that big that we can't have like billboards all across the world. So we work together with manufacturers, actually with Volvo, with Bang & Olufsen, with Apple, with Netflix, that we try to join forces to educate. So that's really what we do a lot of the time. And now when it comes to me personally, as one small wheel in that whole effort, I think for me personally, my work is probably 90% education, to be honest. So my main job is educating Michael's clients, yeah, all across the world. So dealing a lot with the labels and the artists, and of course the mixing engineers that are new to it, and explaining those concepts that are relevant to them, which is, again, what are the workflows? How does that work when a stereo mix already exists? The topic you also talked about, that great idea of starting with Dolby Atmos early in the process. We actually had a little presentation about this 4 hours ago, where a mixing engineer here from Denmark was showing how he worked in Atmos and switched to the fold down to stereo, and showed that it actually sounded quite similar to the original stereo mix of that same record. And all of these little steps in the sequence, and that's what I've been working on for quite a few years now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, the artist intent, back to what you guys were talking about, artist intent. The other artist that I was going to talk about for a second was Bonnie Raitt, and Bonnie came into the studio, and so we started the same kind of question. Yeah. I want to, she actually reached out to me and she goes, "Hey, I want you to do my record, but I don't know what this is." So she came over and I did the same sort of couple-hour playback. And finding out artist intent was for her. She's like, "Well, all of this swirly stuff is great, but," and I call it rodeo music because you got the ceiling speakers and you kind of go, woo, anyway. But for her, she's like, "I'm a band. I've been playing for 50 years with a 4-piece in front of me. That's how I want to be, put out." Without the artist intent, what we find is labels owning music they're out there putting things out that don't really have the intent. Therefore, they're not necessarily communicating what the artist wanted in the first place. Does it need to be the same? Could it be different? But the other side of that is what you said is I absolutely agree with you, is that people are figuring out, and it is by far, to me, the best way is to start with the immersive spatial Atmos version first and then move to stereo. All of the work that we have to do to try to hammer things down that we've developed over the last 50 years to get everything we can out of 2 speakers, when you take those chunks and pieces that have been, and sorry for the non-engineers in the room, this is a bit soapboxy, but when you take all of those overcompressed, highly carved sounds so they fit together and then move them around, that doesn't sound like a piano and that's not a guitar. They're just versions of things that were here. Stem spreading is not mixing, but it's artistic intent. So if you can start from the very beginning and do it right in the first place and then make the specific stereo version, I highly recommend that.
We as Dolby try to make that more possible, both through education, through adding webinars and tutorials to explain that to more people, by also adjusting our tools, by also engaging with artists and labels and preaching exactly that thing. You're actually not saving money, it's the opposite. You're spending more time, you're spending more effort, you're less happy in the end. Right. Yeah. Right.
So I agree that the distribution is the game changer here. Yeah. People can access Dolby Atmos content, people can access Sony 360 RA content.
Even the Ambisonics.
Which they can before. I think...
Well...
A version of.
They can access a bit stream, and it depends on what product you have,
right?
Which will
or
decide
what streaming platform.
So a good example, just to hammer that home, is if you have an Apple device that has a decoder, which will output multi-channel audio, which Apple will then process. So you can then get a virtualization of a multi-channel mix. It's not the original mix that was in the studio. It is a compromise of it, but nonetheless it is multi-channel, and therefore it has the potential to be so-called spatial when you apply these directional filters. But Android, they only have an AC4 decoder, which outputs 2 channels of pre-spatialized audio, and is very, very different in that sense, because now it's locked in. You have those directional filters already applied, and there's nothing you can do dynamically. There is, but it's not the same as doing, let's say, a raw binaural rendering with dynamic head tracking. So what the consumer gets differs very much on the device that you have, which I think is your point. I think the pressure is a little bit on consumer products to then faithfully deliver that experience to the users. If I only have a soundbar, how can I best make that Atmos impression to the user? Or if I only have 2 products, should I play the stereo down mix, or should I do something more with those multi-channel signals that are coming in? And that's a very difficult thing to juggle when we also have challenges in stereo in the first place.
Yeah. How many times you've been to somebody's house and they got a speaker on the shelf and one on the floor? And
that is nothing new, right? We've since the 50s, no one has listened to stereo correctly.
I mean, it's always a chicken or the egg story, right? Because if people don't have the equipment at home, why would anyone invest in recording it? And if no one is recording for it, why would you ever get the equipment at home, right? But I think, here, as you were mentioning, it is down to the distribution, really. And when you have these big actors like Apple, for example, who are investing and saying, if you want to release music on this platform, it should be in some sort of immersive format. And then you have this massive rollout, and then it sort of becomes this snowball. So then, you have a lot of actors that don't provide it today, but I think over time it will be the opposite effect. You're going to be the odd one out not providing it. It's sort of totally. The ball is rolling, basically, I would say.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, guys.